Hi everybody, I'm back again and I'm here with a new story for you. Tonight, for those of you who are just tuning in, what I've been doing is I've been printing off all of my dad's manuscripts and reading them. I'm reading them as a way of editing, but I originally live streamed everything through Twitch, so if you want current broadcasts, then go there. These ones have been edited, so for pauses and us, so there'll be 25% less us. Anyway, I'm just starting off a new story, so you're tuning in just right. If you're interested in other stories, you can go back to past broadcasts. The name of this story is called A Voice in the Darkness, and judging by the thickness, it is going to be a larger one. So, without further ado, I present you with A Voice in the Darkness. Chapter 1. The village was dead. The buildings had burned out, leaving ashes and half-burned timbers, as well as a pervasive smell of burnt wood. Worse still, here and there were upright figures, men, women, and sometimes even children, impaled and left to die. Doleg and Strag signaled his men forward to investigate, though he knew very well that the Nanissas would have left no one alive. There were huddled bundles of rags, both large and small, lying among the destroyed houses. The fortunate ones, who'd resisted too much, or perhaps were just in someone's way, were cut down with a sword stroke. Doleg knew altogether the methods of the Nanissa raiders. Those too old or too young for a forced march were slaughtered. The rest were driven off to slavery. Horses kicked up fine ash as they moved forward. A day, maybe 2 days ago. He didn't turn. He knew Padre Blue Sky's lumpy barrel-shaped body would be sitting on a horse just to his right rear. Yes, probably too late to chase after them. I'd like to try, though. I think our horses might have a little speed in them. Maybe we can catch the bandy-legged little buggers before they get across the little river. Call them into formation, then? Doleg was the commander of the frontier, and rode on patrols as often as was feasible. He could have called the men into order by himself, but it was better that orders go through Padre. That way, when it came to a serious action, little time would be lost with people looking to Doleg for orders, or worse, for confirmation of Padre's orders. Off they went along the trail. The Nanissas would take the easiest trail to the nearest ford, so there was not much need to guess just what direction they would have gone. Doleg looked at the ground. Scavengers had already been at work. But still, the kinds of death suffered there were clear. It was something he had seen entirely too often before. Large and small bodies smashed with sword strokes, or transfixed by arrows, and occasionally worse, where Nanissas felt they could take the time. On the way back, if all went reasonably well, Doleg and his men would try to bury the dead. At present, the best thing to do was to see that as few of their killers as possible made it back across the little river, to the refuge of the debatable lands beyond. They pressed the horses as much as they dared, without wearing them into the ground. Doleg's patrol was heavy cavalry of length wheel, men wearing lamellar armor and conical steel helmets. He was confident that they could deal with the number of Nanissas they were following, though it was not necessarily a sure thing. If the Nanissas were joined by more of their tribesmen, it could be a bad thing. On the other hand, this was late in the year already for the Nanissas to be coming across the frontier. It was also late enough in the year for rain showers to put down the dust, so there was no dust plume from the fugitives to give Lantha a notion of how far ahead the Nanissas might be. For the first little while, the trail had been marked by bodies, men, women, and children too dazed with terror or grief to keep up, and were left behind with a quick sword stroke. Often enough, the sword stroke was not sufficient to kill, just enough to leave the person crippled, to die whatever death found them out in the open. Doleg clenched his jaw at the thought that at least none of them had survived long enough for his column to find them, and leave them with him with the decision of trying to do something for them, or leaving them in order to allow the raiders any more time to escape, or lose men caring for them. Then suddenly 2 point men were coming back around the shoulder of a hill, and Doleg didn't even need their waved hand signals to know that the enemy were in sight. "Have the men ready to deploy into line on the move, Padra." "Yes, sir." Even when he came around the shoulder of the hill himself, Doleg could see the job was nowhere near done. There were about 30 of the raiders, little men wearing leather and furs, riding hardy little horses. There was not a scale of metal armor out there, but those recurved bows could send an arrow a considerable distance, and every Nanissa trained in marksmanship from a frighteningly early age. The Nanissa's own rear guards had brought them the warning of how close the Lantha were, of course, and the plainsmen were beginning to flee. If they'd had time, they probably would have slaughtered every man, woman, or child or sheep they'd brought away, but in this instance, the Lantha did not allow them time. The Lantha had bows of their own, which nearly matched the Nanissa weapons for range, and the Lantha were all adequate bowmen. Arrows flew, and a few Nanissas went down, while a few Nanissa shafts came back. Doleg concentrated on speed, hoping to get within sword range of at least some of the Nanissas before they escaped. One of the raiders' horses were flagging, and Doleg caught up to him and slashed once with the sword before the Nanissa could return. He didn't stop to see whether the man was dead, but continued his race. Then a man turned to fight, and Doleg traded sword strokes with him for a few moments, while the Lantha went thundering past them. Padra Bluesky reined his horse long enough to slash backhand, dropping Doleg's opponent from the saddle. Doleg looked at the Nanissa for a moment, but either he was dead or he wouldn't be going anywhere until after they'd finished with the rest of the band. He urged his horse into a gallop again. In the end, 6 out of about 30 got away. "We've punished them, Dolia, but I don't think the losses are even, counting the poor buggers from the village." Doleg shook his head. "I don't like to add and subtract numbers, Padya. Just gets me trying to work out how many of them are worth one of ours, and that doesn't do me any good. Just kill the buggers whenever we come across them, and wish the Emperor would realize what's going on up here." Padra frowned. "True enough, but be careful. Our troops are loyal, but some carry other loyalties too." "You mean some send notes along to the Emperor letting him know what a naughty boy I am?" "Yes. I hate to think that any of my soldiers, but there's a difference between the noble warriors of the epics and real life." "Well, let's get back and see what's left of the village." It was a slow progress. The villagers were no more able to march quickly for the Lantha than they had for the Nanissas, perhaps even less so, for the Lantha were not likely to deal with a lagger by a quick sword stroke. Nor did the matter end at the sight of the ruined village, for the villagers were unwilling to try to settle on or near the place with its horrible memories. "We could march them all the way back to Elbdarg, maybe parcel them out some of the local villages there," Padra said. "You sound as if you don't like the idea, Padja." Padra shrugged his broad shoulders. "It's not one village by itself, it's the example we're setting. We welcome this village in, we could find ourselves with all the villagers from outlying areas running to us when the Nanissas move, and us without food to feed them." Doleg shrugged his shoulders in turn. "If we leave them out there, either the Nanissas will come by and finish the job, or the people will starve. They've lost everything, Padya. Winter rains are coming, and what crops they've harvested have been taken or ruined by the Nanissas. We leave them, they die. We take them along, they have some little chance. So we'll take them along. You're the frontier commander, Dolia." By the time they came to Elbdarg, the headquarters of the frontier forces, the refugees were a thoroughly miserable-looking lot. Most of them were still shambling along like animated corpses, and even the better off of them from time to time wore a grim and haunted look. You think any of them will be good for anything again, Dolia? Hard to say, Padua. I'd say some of them will come out of it, but I wouldn't predict which ones just now. Huh. How many more villages will we lose? It depends on us, doesn't it? It does. It would certainly be nice of the Emperor if the Emperor would permit some of those troops that sit in Plutarch to come out and give us a hand. If you won't send a real army up here to settle the matter, I figure we can wait a long, long time for that. Doleg loosened the laces on his armor and pulled the shirt of interlocking scales over his head. He dropped it on the chest that made up part of the modest furnishings of his quarters, and the metal chimed softly. One of the servants had already brought in a large basin of water, with which he washed as much of the trail muck off him as possible. He'd have a proper bath later, but there would undoubtedly be half a dozen or more laters, requiring the immediate attention of the border commander himself. He just finished making himself a bit more presentable when a knock sounded on his door, and it was pushed open sufficiently to allow a boy to stick his head in. Osmond Selvent says there's a very important message come over the silver lump. Tell him I'll be right there. The magicians who monitored the communicating device had their orders. Very important was a restricted term, meaning something that, in the opinion of the magician, required the commander's immediate attention. He wondered for a moment whether that might be his brother, Prince Twarda, requiring him to put himself under arrest and report to the capital. No, not likely. Twarda wouldn't trust Doleg to put himself under arrest. Rather, he'd get in touch with some of the men he'd planted in the garrison, have them arrest Doleg and bring him in. Doleg shook his head and went off to the stone tower where the silver lump was kept. The Emperor is dead, sir. The lanky magician handed Doleg a piece of paper. Doleg scanned the message. Though the Emperor was in Great Medolagus, far to the south, the ramifications of his death could well reach this far to the north, in this piece of imperial territory known as the Principality of Lanthguil. The only important fact on the paper was that the Emperor had died, apparently of lung fever. It may indeed have been lung fever, but lung fever was also one of the euphemisms commonly used for a successful poison. Who knew, up here in this wild northwestern section of the empire, just who was working with what machinations down there in the great city of Medolagus? No word of the air? Sometimes these lung fevers took off 2 or 3 generations. No, sir, nothing further. The magician Solvent grimaced. As one of the magicians capable of operating the silver lump, he could take liberties some might not dare, such as showing his expression that his superior had asked a foolish question. Word of the air would have been included in the message as written down. So, light up silver lump and let's roast out my brother. Another grimace, this time of distaste. Solvent, still full of his importance as not only a magician, but a magician of standing, called the communication device by its formal designation, the Silver Faces. Third god's toe, even an old Warloss down in Plutarch, had been a magician when this fellow's grandparents had been introduced to each other. He called it the silver lump. Solvent turned to the oak table which sat on a plank of some indeterminable dark wood. On top of that plank sat a fist-sized lump of silver. From discussions with Borylus, Doleg knew that it had 20 polished facets, no 2 faces of equal dimensions. Solvent tapped one of the faces, and the whole thing began to glow. Solvent spoke a quick phrase, in which Doleg caught the words Palaba. An old Borylus had said that had been the original name of the city which was now Plutarch. Then there was a wait. Solvent turned to Doleg. The previous message came through well, Osban. We should have no trouble this time, unless a thunderstorm has moved between us and Plutarch. Doleg said nothing. He knew about the silver lump, how it needed a magician at both sending and receiving points, that it could not send or receive through a thunderstorm. Nor did it work during eclipses of the sun and some other phenomena which the magicians themselves could not precisely define. The glow around the lump expanded, then rose to hover above it. A portion of the glow cleared to show the inside of another plain wooden room, much the same as this one, as well as a long face with a grey beard. The Osban Doleg wishes to speak to the prince. The long face nodded. I will send a messenger. Doleg thought that a lot of trouble could be avoided if his royal brother could get over his distrust of relatives. Too late for that wish, though. Uncle Rubga's attempt to take the princely seat of Lengthwheel from their father, with all the attendant distress and confusion that stayed with Tuarda even after he'd inherited his father's position. All this despite the fact their father had finally died peacefully in his bed. Then, too, Tuarda lived in Plutarch, with the imperial agent, his military contingent, and his squadron of imperial galleys. The imperial agent, who kept an eye on things in the principality, also kept alive the 2 centuries-old memory of the warrior emperor's destruction in Lengthwheel. The emperors in Plutarch were a reminder that the emperor, whichever emperor's bottom warmed the throne in Great Medolagus, could decide that the prince was not able to manage his duties and step in. Third God's toe, all it needed was for the emperor to decide that one of his favorites needed a place and a promotion. Doleg and Solvent waited for some time. Then, at last, another face showed, a heavier, older version of Doleg's. What now? I've just been informed of the death of the emperor. Of course, I had a message sent to you. Thanks. I wondered if you wanted to discuss it at all, or if you thought it could wait until I came in for the winter. I don't think there's anything that needs discussing. You don't think a new emperor is going to matter that much to us up here, do you? It might be nice to try to get young Teva True to cut back on some of our taxes as an enthronement benefit. You take care of keeping the Ninnises on their side of the frontier. I'll take care of the taxes, Doleg. Doleg nodded. It always came to this, that he managed to say something that his brother saw as infringing on his princely prerogatives. He would have to choose his next words with care to prevent a useless, nasty argument. As you say, Prince. Yes, I'm the prince, and don't you forget it. I'm keeping an eye on you. Make sure you look after your military command, and don't start eyeing the crown. Too late. No safe things to say now. No, Tuarda. Good. Now, when will you be in? I plan to leave the day after tomorrow. I should be there in a week. Fine. You're authorized to bring a guard of 50. I'll see you then. The globe blanked, and the silver lump became a many-sided hunk of plain silver again. Well, that was by no means one of Tuarda's worst tirades. Doleg felt a little better. There were few things worse than standing there, letting some magician, and in particular Solvent, hear his brother dressing him down. Of course, there had been that last instruction. Third God's toe. He was authorized to bring a guard of 50? The watchman at Plutarch had miscounted and declared he had 51 soldiers in his entourage. Tuarda would declare that his brother was coming in rebellion with an army. Bah! Thank you, Solvent. Your servant, Osban. He was almost certain that Solvent was one of his brother's eyes and ears. He knew most of them and didn't bother getting rid of them. For one thing, Tuarda would consider that suspicious, and it would simply mean that Doleg had to watch for which person replaced him as a spy. Worse yet, Doleg, had no notion of replacing his brother. His only concern was keeping an army on the frontier that could turn back Nanissa incursions. And that on what little was left after the Emperor's taxmen had raped the land. I don't like both of us being away all winter, sir. Padre Blue Skies seldom called Doleg sir, save when he was admonishing him. What, you don't think Laharch is up? Laharch is up to it? Padre's lumpy little face remained glum, not responding to the humor. Just don't think it's safe, sir. I need you along with me. Tuarda trusts you more than me. Doesn't seem to think my potential unworthiness has infected you yet. Come on, it's not that bad. It is. If I tell my brother he's standing on the ground, he'll stoop over to feel for himself. If you tell him the moon is falling, he'll run for cover. Sir! All right, I exaggerate, but only a bit. Sometimes I wonder if you're one of the people he set to watching me. But no, you're too good at your real work, keeping the Nanissas on their own side of the little river. Tuarda's spies are all mediocre at best. But you're pushing us away from the main question, Dolia. Suppose there's an early spring, and the hairy little beggars start coming across when neither you or I are here. The Iharch will have to go across and shake a finger at them and admonish them regarding their failure to abide by the terms of the treaty. Treaty? The word sounded like a curse. They only hold to a treaty so that as long as it suits them to do so. They'll come drifting across, looting and burning, destroying villages and settlements, setting up their own camps, and suddenly they'll claim a big chunk of our land. We'll fight every encroachment too. If I could train an army of bowmen, I could teach them a lesson. And if I had 4 hooves, you could ride me for a horse. Doleg grinned. Sorry, I was fishing again, wasn't I? A lifetime to train a good bowman, and I want 20,000 of them tomorrow. Huh, you do well enough with what you're given. Well enough? I suppose so, if well enough is barely holding the eastern border. We tell the Emperor we can't hold without more money to spend on defense. We tell him we're in serious danger up here. But all we are is a voice shouting into the darkness. Not sure if anyone is listening. Not even sure that anyone's out there to hear. Sir? Yes, I know. Watch what I say and where. It's just 3 years since I had to send in a testament of loyalty with a free gift of 100 gold imperials to the Emperor because word had come that Doleg and Strag had spoken disloyally. Yes, I'd have thought that might have taught you something, sir. Perhaps I'm unteachable, too wild and rowdy. Perhaps you need to find a wife. Third God's toe, that would give Tuarda fits. Me starting up a family without his permission, and at a time when his own succession depends on one child? Padre made a grimace of his own. You do the prince wrong, sir. He has an heir. Yes, the 3rd son of a cousin, young T'Pral Ladavent Osman Ladavent's son. A 12-year-old boy betrothed to a babe of 18 months. Doleg took a deep breath. But you've heard me give that tirade before. You'll be ready the day after tomorrow? You're trying to make me mad, Dolia? Come, a little insight like that couldn't make you mad. Now, if you don't think it'll interfere with your preparations, I'll invite you to the Grey Loon for a cup of wine. Ha! The only reason I've never been able to drink you under the table is that someone always comes along at the right time with a problem only the commander can solve. I have a suspicion you've set it up with them to save you. You don't recall the time at the little inn on the Bush Creek? Doesn't count. I was already fatigued to death from keeping those recruits from killing themselves while setting up a biovac. Arguing amiably, they set off to the inn. Artenemy, child of Chillard, was not happy. Bought and sold, she declared. Bought and sold like a broodmare. I wonder if something was knocked off the price because no one knows whether the mare is barren or not. Oh, husbandy, it's not as bad as all that. You're to marry the prince himself. He's a handsome man and still young. Artemene shot a look at her maid. You're going to tell me all the comforting tale, aren't you, Gurmia. Women don't get a say, and in particular women of your station. It could be worse too. Did your father not refuse the offer of the fat old Bornlai, despite his many cattle and mines on his land? Wasn't that it? Gurmi, stolid and pragmatic, refused to allow herself to be flustered. Osvini, you've known for quite some time that your station means you don't marry according to your will, but according to what's best for the family. And, as you've admitted, matters could be worse. You're marrying the Prince of Lengthguil, which is a step up in status. You go along, give the prince an heir, and you can live your comfort in all your days. If I survive the birth of the child at all, unlike poor Absard, the two gods and all the spirits have all these things in their hands, girl. Women are marrying and having babies all over the world, and by no means all of them die of it. Would you prefer to run away and live in the wild? It's only in the tales that sort of thing works out. There aren't any handsome princes from faraway lands that are looking for a beautiful wife. What there are is bandits and renegades of all sorts, filthy as wild pigs and mean as snakes besides. Her timidity calmed herself with an effort. No, I'll have to go, whatever I might wish. But even women of my status are occasionally consulted. We want to arrange your betrothal to Osban, this of that place. We hope you approve. This was only we've arranged your betrothal to the prince. Pick out some fine clothes to wear when you meet him. Look at your father's point of view, girl. What kind of marriage would be better than to the prince? Only a marriage to the emperor himself, and that's as likely as a flying sheep. Not to mention that you'd have to go off and live in the great Medolagus, which everyone knows is a wicked place. Now, are you going to stay in your room all day kicking the footstool, or are you going to take advantage of your father's open purse? Kick the footstool and these? She extended her foot, showed in a pretty green cloth slipper. I only kick things when I'm wearing riding boots. Oh, well, I suppose you're right. I'd better make the best of it. If I pretend hard enough for long enough, perhaps I'll come to convince myself that I like it. Teva True, third of that name, Emperor of Holmari, august ruler of all within the lands of Holmar, frowned. He'd been trained from a young age to be ready to take the throne in his turn. His tutors, all wise men and very learned, had showed him mistakes his predecessors had made in ancient times, shown all the results, favorable and unfavorable, that had flowed with each decision. But now he was on the throne himself. It was his word that was the law. Though he had had a veritable forest of officials who could have and would advise him at every point up to, it seemed, which side of the imperial bed he should get out of in the morning. War is not something to be undertaken lightly, he said. Quite so, august ruler. Valshemta was an old soldier, gray-bearded, wearing his cuirass as though he would stride out of the imperial palace and into battle. But at any time the empire seems in the slightest disarray, the Gushnappids begin pushing on our southeastern border. The beginning of my reign is a time of disarray. He was pleased to see that the old soldier did not try to back away from what he'd said. August ruler, the transformation ever so easy. There is always some disarray when a new ruler begins his reign. Gushnappids can be expected to test our borders at the very least. To have an army prepared to not only throw them back, but to invade Gushnapid territory will go far towards proving to the enemies, within and without, that our august ruler is prepared for all eventualities. I see. What of the Principality of Lengthguil? The news from there is not pleasant. The Nanisses are still within our borders, and they continue to press. Valshemta bowed. True, august ruler, but they are only a mob of horsemen, be they ever so numerous. Even were they to overrun all of Lengthguil, which I doubt is possible, we still control the sea, and they could not cross the straits. We, on the other hand, could and would send an army up to crush them. Tevatru nodded. His tutors had dealt at length on how his ancestor, the warrior emperor, had crushed Alantha. The northwest could be a nuisance, but the imperial army was still supreme. See to it, then, and be sure that I am kept advised of all events. Yes, August ruler. Belshemta bowed his way out. It was a fine fall day, Doleg thought, and thus a rarity. As autumn progressed, the days would become more cloudy, with rain becoming more frequent, until full winter arrived. Cool weather, predominant rain, and sometimes mixed with snow. Then would be the days to sit indoors in front of a blazing fire. One advantage winter held was that the Ninissas up on the high plain got more snow and remained huddled in their felt tents all winter. They wouldn't come out until spring. That's what it is, Padya. What is? The Ninissas sit in their cold, drafty tents all winter, nothing but dry horse dung for fires. That's why they're such a miserable, nasty lot in the summer. You'd feel like that, too, if you spent the winter smelling all your family's sweat in a cold tent. Padra grinned. That's one way of thinking of things. You aren't thinking of suggesting we invite them to spend winter in the comfort of our houses in hopes they'll be more tractable come spring? Doleg laughed. Third God's tone, no. That'd just make them more determined not to go back to the high plains. It was one of those things so serious that one had to make a joke out of it. The Ninissas were quite quiet at the moment, save for the occasional border raid, a few villages or farms destroyed. But aside from a few fools down in Medolagus, no one really believed that the latest treaty with the Ninissas was actually forever. Next spring or the following spring, the men from the high plains would be coming across the borders of Lengthwheel. Without more help from the Empire, principality would be hard put to resist. Surrender was not an option. Life under the first chief of the Ninissas was a chancy thing if you were a Ninissa. If you weren't, you lived your life from day to day, hoping that when the blow fell, you'd likely die quickly and not in one of the slow deaths the Ninissa delighted in. Refugees from the land between the Grey Flow was commonly known as Little River, and Arush, commonly known as the River, had made that clear. 2 years ago, the Battle of Lame Creek had rendered the land between the two rivers a debatable land, though it seemed that the debate had been won and lost at Lame Creek. Officially, Lengthwheel's border stood at Arush, but in reality, the Grey Flow was as far west as they could truthfully claim to rule. Even that. Trouble ahead, sir. Yes, indeed. The point man was coming back fast, waving a signal flag. It wasn't that the signal flag warned massive enemy formation over the hill, so get armed and hope for the best. This was just something strange going on, so be careful. The point man, a little slender light horseman, drew his horse to a stop in front of Doleg. Looks like a wagon mishap up ahead, Osban. Someone fancy, 20 armed guards. Might be a bandit trap, but I doubt it. Right, you go on ahead and look around. We'll follow at the usual pace. Yes, Osban. The man was off again. When they came over the rise, they could view the scene. Padra said, "Runaway team, Dolia. Wagon smashed to splinters. Fancy dresses and all scattered along the trail. Too complex for a bandit trap, you think?" Padra snorted. "Bandits aren't likely to lay a trap for 50 armed men. That lot down there look like they need someone to tell them how to go about things, don't they?" Indeed, the 20 armed guards who had apparently accompanied the wagon were wandering along the hill, almost aimlessly, picking up bits and pieces and carrying them along. A woman of middle years was sitting on a wooden chest, while a younger woman wrapped a bandage around her head. Doleg's first thought was that the younger woman was a serving girl, the elder, Osmond's wife, out on a journey. He revised the conclusion as he came closer. The serving girl might just wear a pair of trousers or of that sort of cut if her mistress had grown weary of them so soon. But that pair of gleaming riding boots? No, they didn't belong to any servant. Which meant a slightly remarkable young noblewoman messing up her own noble hands, dressing a maidservant's wounded head. With the way head wounds bleed, it wouldn't be something she could do and not get mucked up. She looked up briefly as the ringing, clattering, heavy cavalry approached, then went back to work. Send some of the lads off to help with picking up the stuff there. Get someone to see to the wagon, whether or not it can be made roadworthy again. Right. Her Temene shot another look at this fellow approaching. Handsome, and for sure he knew it. She finished her bandaging and looked up at him again. Can I be of assistance, Albany? I think everything's in hand. I see. Where are you bound for? Plutarch? Not that it's any of your affair, she thought. Aha, so am I. Allow me to offer you space in one of my wagons. Aha, so am I. Allow me to offer you space in one of my wagons. You're going to Plutarch now? I wonder where you are really going. No need. I'll send one of my men to the nearest town to buy a wagon. No need, Osmany. I'm sure you can make space in one of my wagons. So then the poor little woman would be in your debt? I don't think so. No, that won't be necessary. You might, though, direct us to the nearest town. He was still smiling. Confound him. Now he shook his head. No one in any of the towns hereabouts is likely to sell you a wagon. At least not for any reasonable price. Ask the commander of your guard. He'll know these sorts of things. My guard commander is laid up with a broken leg and barely conscious. I'm not completely helpless, though. Your guard commander was riding the wagon? Of course not. The groom was driving the wagon with my woman, Gurmy, riding inside. Something startled a rabbit or a bird, panicked horses, and they started running. The guard's commander's horse fell when he was trying to stop the team, and at some point back there, the wagon hit a rock, overturned, spilling the groom out. He's dead, a broken neck, and Gurmy was bruised from things flying about in the wagon. This cut on her head was the worst she suffered, the divine pair be praised. I see. Well, please believe me when I tell you you'd be better off taking the offer of one of my wagons. She gave him an exasperated look. It won't do you any good, you know. I'm spoken for. She was immediately annoyed by her use of her status to ward off a predatory male. Oh, that's fine. My brother would never allow me to marry anyway. He wouldn't want me to have that close a connection to any other Osban. She proceeded to annoy herself even further by declaring, My intended is Prince Tuarda. Third God's toe, you're betrothed to my brother? If you're the prince's brother, surely you've heard of all this. His face shadowed. Osmany, the number of things my brother chooses not to tell me are, well, let's just say that I'm not aware of everything in my brother's mind. No, I think you'd best accompany me. Bad enough that I escort you into Plutarch, but for me to come in with the news that I've left you on the road with a smashed wagon isn't something I'd care to risk. He turned and began shouting orders to his men, leaving her frowning there. She's a good-looking one, Dolia. Nice for you. Good-looking, but she's got a tongue on her like a file. Besides which, she's my brother-in-law's new fiancé. His fiancé? They're God's toe, Dolia. See what kinds of things happen while we're away? There wasn't a whisper of it last spring. There hasn't been a hint of it in any of the messages he sent this summer. No, there wasn't. Dolia grimaced. I wonder if Tuarda was even going to invite me to the wedding, or just let me find out by accident. That's going a bit far, even for you, Dolia. I wish you could understand that I don't want his job and all the fussy politicking that goes along with it. Like making sure that the most powerful Osmonds of Length Gwyle think they're higher in the prince's favor than the other, and begging the emperor to leave us a little bit after taxes to defend ourselves with, and keeping yourself from going off on tirades, which is some faithful servant of the empire will write down and send to Medolagus. Third God's toe. I was doing it again, wasn't I? Very good thing I'm not the prince. Padra grinned. Yes, indeed. First thing you'd do is declare war on the Empire and kick O-Ring Fuzz's skinny butt out of the country. What'd you think, Padya? Could I get some kind of reward from our esteemed Imperial agent by reporting how my second-in-command was saying nasty things about him? You'd better consider the source and figure you'd been saying worse things so he'd find you. Well, it looks as if this lot has gotten everything sorted out. Loaded the Osbini stuff and all. Shall we march, or have you worked yourself into a sufficient snit yet? Third God's toe. I can't even get any sympathy for my brother warrior and second in command. Yes, if you're going to harp at me, we may as well just do it on the trail. This was, he considered, another good thing about not being prince. He and Padya could pester each other in companionable fashion without someone thinking that Padya wasn't showing sufficient respect to the Lord Prince, and him getting into trouble. What could have been a comfortable 3 days' travel turned into a somber journey. It seemed to Dole that Hermione almost blamed him for the circumstances of their meeting, so she was polite but very terse, and the conversation between the two of them was limited to short phrases, and only of the most necessary things. Any time he attempted to engage her in small talk, she answered politely, but so briefly he'd have to be completely dense to miss the fact she didn't want to talk to him. They were still 3 days out of Plutarch when the guards escorted a messenger who, from the look at him, had ridden hard. Osban, the man said, your brother is dead. Someone sent a Prachka, and has killed the prince and his daughter 2 nights ago. Years of receiving any sorts of news without a reaction might start camp rumors of this sort and that sort. Served Doleg well. I see, he said. Well, one of my people will give you a bit to drink. Then you can rest yourself and your horse and follow us along behind us for a bit. He started his horse moving. He wondered if he should take a small party and hurry on to the capital, but decided not. It was already 2 days since the prince had died. The most they could save would be another day, and that didn't seem worth the trouble. Plutarch would still be there with all the troubles that go along with it. Okay, so intrigue, mystery, yes. And I know there's some, it's fairly bulky as it is, but there's a few things I want to add on to it. Not a lot, though, because I really, really like this beginning part. This is one of I think it's more of a solid piece, so I'm excited to bring it to you guys. So tune in next week when I bring you the next chapter. Take care.